Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the premiere of Crossing the T's. I'm Rudy Matiello, responsible for Matiello Consultoria. Uh, Hopefully, you guys had a great day today. I believe you were working. You have just finished teaching. So please feel welcome to the brand new Crossing the T's. This is going to be a kind of like a show, a 30-minute show, more of a conversation. So the idea is to have a 30-minute conversation with you guys about how about linguistics, and how these linguistics conversations interfere or interact with our practices in the classroom. Uh, so please join us. Hopefully, we're going to have a great time. So thank you so much. A few messages before we start. If you guys haven't followed us on Instagram yet, so go to Instagram. It's at Machiello Consultoria. So it's MATTIELLO Consultoria. Follow us on Instagram, and please let us know. Send us a DM us saying, I want to be part of our close friends list, because then you're going to have the opportunity to interact with us live in the next episode of Crossing the T's. Um, if you haven't followed us here on YouTube yet, please, at the end of the conversation today, don't forget to hit like if you like the show and to subscribe to the channel. This is really important. The more followers, the more people that subscribe to the channel, the better we're going to create a network for teachers. So please welcome and join us in this brand new, very first episode of Crossing the T's. And today we're going to talk about the use of L1 in the classroom. Some people say this is a controversial conversation. This is a controversial topic. Some people say, "Oh, wow, no, I'm an FNL, FL, EFL teacher, or I'm a language teacher, so no, my students are not allowed to use L1 in the classroom," or "No, I'm not going to use L1 in the classroom because this is going to make my students confused," or "No, I don't let them use L1 in the classroom because this is going to hinder um, the language learning process." Well, we're going to have this conversation today about this. We're going to talk about translanguaging. We're going to talk about concept creation, how L1 is going to help in not only in the creation of concepts, but also in the association of concepts, because our students already have the concept. So hopefully this is going to be a very cool conversation. Don't forget, if you want to interact with us, there's a chat box. Use the chat box to talk to us, to interact with us, to send us questions. I can see that whenever you type something there, please use the chat box. And once again, follow us on Instagram at Machiello Consultoria. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel at the end of the conversation today. All right. So, guys, um, how would you feel um, if you had a student in the classroom or some students in the classroom and they said, "Oh, where is é igual onde fica, right, teacher?" Well, that's that's a very tricky question. Some people say, "Oh, no, I don't want my students to say this," or I wouldn't feel okay with my students saying something like this using L1. Well, what if I say that this could be okay? This could be a very nice production by your students, because we're going to make sure. Of course, I'm assuming our students L1 is Portuguese. But if you're from a different country, probably the L1 of your students is not going to be Portuguese. But anyway, so uh, what if I told you that this would be okay? This could be some sort of hint or some sort of guarantee that, okay, my students got it, they got the point, so yes, I can move on, or I can proceed with the drilling activities, where I can proceed with my lesson. Well, that's what happens. Whenever students use L1, this is a great hint that this is a signal that we're going to receive from our students saying, whoa, I got it. I understood. Now I know how to use this linguistic feature. I'm ready for that. And we should be okay with this. We should welcome this, because what do we want from our students? We want our students to actually produce, be able to produce in L2. But not only this, we're going to see in a moment how L1 is going to interfere in the process of second language acquisition. And it does. It really does. For instance, the use of L1, or actually having an L1, is going to interfere in the process, because the very early stage of learning a second language, we're going to have something that we call Pidgin. What, Rudy? Yes, Pidgin. Pidgin is whenever a person is trying to communicate in L2, but this person doesn't have a lot of knowledge of this L2. So basically, this person is going to make a very huge confusion or mixture of L1 and the target language. And we may have something like this. Where New Yorkie statuate, you know, something that I created here just to symbolize what a pidgin would look like, you know. And of course, you may say, oh, but really, I don't think this is very appropriate, because no, I'm not saying this is appropriate, but this is, again, the very early stage of a second language acquisition. Our students have no control over the second language. They have very limited knowledge, very limited repertoire. Actually, in this case here, I wouldn't say repertoire. I wouldn't use repertoire. We have some knowledge because we have some instance of new and new, but at the same time, and we also have um, some instances of syntax, because we have where in the beginning of the question, but I cannot say that this is a real language, or this is an expanded language. This should be more a reduced language. And this is called Pidgin. Whenever a person doesn't have a very extended language, the person doesn't have control over L2, the person doesn't have a very extended repertoire of L2, but still the person tries to communicate. The person knows some words, some isolated words. They combine, but this person has domain over L1. So this person is the person will try, or our students will try to insert some linguistic features of L2 into L1, because that's what our students, or what this person has control of, and the person will still try to communicate, make use of the language. And this is called, this term Pidgin comes from uh, the immigrants in the slavery era, because whenever we had um, commute of groups of people from one place to another, of course these people would have to communicate at a certain point, at some point. And then immigrants, unfortunately slaves, because they didn't have knowledge of the language that was spoken in the place they were in, that they were transferred, they would try to insert certain words into the syntax they had domain over, which was their L1. And that's what we call Pidgin. Okay? Um, no subordination, no presence of complex syntax whatsoever, nothing like that. Nothing like that. Okay? And we also have some instances of Pidgin even today. Of course, it started with immigrants, it started in the slavery era, but we still have some instances, okay? Because once again, it's the influence of L1 that generates this Pidgin. It's a very crude speech that generates Pidgin, and very simple, not very sophisticated communication that we have here. And of course, I have some instances. For example, don't train. Don't train is something that came from um, Chinese, meaning that high-speed train. So whenever they want to refer to a high-speed train that they have in Asia, they say don't train, don't train. So this is an influence of their L1, strong influence of L1 over L2 because they have don't coming from probably the negative auxiliary of English and train, which is the English word for train. And they do have this vehicle in Asia, and they incorporated that using the language that they have domain over, which is Chinese. We also have another one that's smilance. What would be a smilance? A smilance is the term that they use to refer to when a person is smiling without saying anything. So whenever a person is smiling without producing any sound, making any noise, maybe grinning, then they refer to that as smilance. So it's a combination of smile and silence. They created smilance. And here's one of my favorites. How are you? It's not a question, even though I don't like the term standard English, but if you open textbooks, we're going to see that what? How are you is a question. The same as how do you do? How are you doing? Or something like that. But uh, in China, in the influence of Chinese, Mandarin, and some Asian languages, they have strong influence of their L1 over English, and then how are you is not a question. Not even the intonation is the intonation of a question. It's just how are you, meaning that um, why you or how be you. So whenever they want to say why you, they say how are you. It's hard to say that without the question intonation, isn't it? But anyway, that's just to give you some examples of how the L1 can influence the performance of L2. But again, that doesn't mean that's something very bad. That doesn't mean this is bad. I'm not saying this is bad. We're just talking about how Pidgins are transformed. But of course, we're going to evolve. We're not going to have a very reduced language for the rest of our lives. We're going to be exposed to the language. We're going to have classes thinking about our students. And of course, the language is going to evolve. And when the language evolves, we're going to have what we call creolization of the language, or Creole. Creolization of the language is when it doesn't have um, the simplicity of a pidgin, but it's not formed a language yet. It's kind of like in between. So when pidgin is very simple, Creole has some complexity, some linguistic complexity. Pidgins are very reduced, meaning that there's very little syntax, sometimes not even syntax, just some isolated words, whereas Creole is expanded. There's no organization in Pidgin. Creole has some organization, so we see the evolution of the language, the evolution of speech coming here in this case. And more importantly, a Pidgin is domain dependent. What does that mean? Remember, it's domain dependent because what's the only language that our students have domain? They have domain over their L1. So they depend on L1 to start producing something, to start communicating in L2. Whereas in Creole, it's language dependent. So I don't need to depend on my knowledge of L1 anymore. I need to pay attention to this new language that I'm learning right now if I want to communicate very effectively. This is really, really important. But again, I'm not saying that usage of L1 is something bad. No, not at all. Actually, it's something really positive. There's a quote here by Thibault, and he tells about thinking about language as a multiscalar organization. So if we're going to consider language as a means of communication, our job in the classroom is what? Our job in the classroom is to communicate too. We're teachers. We're going to communicate. Of course, I am not saying that we are uh, oracles. We are the full possessors of knowledge. That's not what I'm saying. But whatever we can communicate, whatever knowledge we possess, whatever knowledge we have, if we can communicate, if we can share it with our students, and we have to share the knowledge we have with our students, we're going to do that by communicating it by via communication. So we're going to use the language in ways that go beyond the language. We are transcending the rules of the language. That's why we use body language. That's why we use gestures. I know that I use gestures a lot, but that's my Italian heritage. That's why I use my hands a lot when I'm talking, when I'm communicating. But we use that, it transcends the language because we want to get our message across. We want to make our students actually understand whatever type of information that we're sharing with them. So it goes beyond the language. It's not just language, English, language, Portuguese, language, German, language, Japanese. No, it's more than this. We go beyond that. It's beyond historical background, culture. It's way beyond that. We have to think about this, okay? And that's why, because we are going to transcend the language, that's why we cannot say, oh, we cannot use, or students cannot use L1 in the classroom anymore here. No, forget about L1. It's all about L2. No, there are instances, there are situations, there are moments in the class, in the lesson, that the L1 is going to transcend everything, is going to transcend the dynamics and the practices, the classroom practices. And we're going to help our students achieve their goals, whatever the goal is. And that's where translanguage comes into place here. I separated this poem by Baldacci, and this poem, I think this symbolizes translanguaging so well because it's a poem, and then we have in the middle of it we have some instances. This poem is in English, and we have some instances of Spanish. Yo soy de aquí, el único aquí de tú eres, es de la tierra. So why? Why is this happening here? Because if we transfer the situation to the classroom, to a classroom situation, we're going to see our students doing something similar to that. The same thing that I asked you in the very beginning of our conversation here, whenever a student say, ah, I got it. This term in English means blah, 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 blah. In L1, in whatever L1 they have. So this is really important. It's very similar. And why did Baldacci use this instances of Spanish to transcend the language? To transcend the language. Rudy, are you saying that translanguaging is a method? No, I'm not saying translanguaging is a method. Okay, what I'm saying is that we're going to use L1 in the classroom in pretty much the same way that Baldacci used in this poem. In instances, not the full text. Some parts are in Spanish, but the core is in English. And we're going to do the same with L1 in the classroom. We're going to use L1 whenever we want to transcend, whenever we want to have something extra in the communication. And what's this extra? This extra is what's going to make our students achieve their goals. And what's the goal? To understand the language and be able to produce in the language, in the target language. Okay, so we're going to use L1 in some specific cases, and then we'll go back and drill, thinking about, for instance, a PPP. If we think about PPP or the three Ps, we're going to provide a model, a linguistic model. If it's necessary, we can make use of, for instance, here in Brazil, Portuguese. They got it. They understood. Drill. It was very fast. It took us like 5 seconds of 5 seconds of L1, and then we have the whole class ahead of us to use L2 to drill, to perform, etc. So once again, once this is done, the instance of L1 drill in the target language. Okay, so that's what translanguaging is all about. Of course, in this case here, it was on purpose because the person had full control of the language. Of course, our students are not going to have full control of the second language yet, but they will. And when they do, then they'll be able to actually go through languages whenever they feel it's necessary. All right. And this reminds me of something that Lee said in one of his books of 2017. Multilinguals do not think unilingually. So if we don't think in a given language, and I've written some articles about how we do not have a specific language for our thoughts. So if we don't have a language for our thoughts, why should we avoid L1 in the process? We shouldn't avoid L1 in the process, actually. We should embrace it and use it as our ally. Because again, in continuing actually, number two, human beings think beyond language. It requires, and thinking requires the use of a variety of cognitive, semiotic, and modal resources, etc., etc., etc. So, Rudy, what are the cognitive aspects of using the language, thinking, and etc.? The cognitive aspect is when we are comparing the language, because our students are actually going to do that. They are going to make comparisons like, okay, even in the very early stages when language is only a pidgin, so they are going to make comparison. They're going to say something like, okay, of course in their minds, okay, I have this new language, but what's the language that I already possess? Portuguese, Spanish, German. Okay, this is the language that I possess. What are the similarities? What are the differences? They're going to make this comparison. So this reasoning requires cognitive usage. We're using our cognition to make this comparison. Semiotic. Semiotic is the same. Where is this going to be represented in the classroom when we're teaching an L2 or a second language? The analysis of sentences in L1 and in L2 that are the same sentences that we have in L2 and in their native languages. They're going to make this analysis. They're going to analyze the semiotic of it. Like, oh, this has some meaning in my country, but maybe in my language in my country. But if I use the exact same sentence in English, will I have the same meaning? Will I have the same impact if I use it? Like idioms. Idioms are great because we can translate, most of them we can translate to our targets, to our native languages. But do we have the same meaning if we do that? Probably not. This is semiotics. So that's why using L1 is so important, because we're actually going beyond the language here. Very, very important. And going beyond the language and making this comparison leads me to another conversation. What's the conversation, Rudy? I don't know what you're going to talk about anymore. We only have like 3, 4 more minutes. I know we have only 3, 4 more minutes. I promise I won't be too long. Okay, but the conversation about uh, universal language. Sorry, universal grammar. Duh, universal grammar. This is a conversation that we have because if we think about universal grammar, what's universal grammar? The idea or the theory that every human being possesses a linguistic device. So, based on evolution, our brains come with some sort of microchip responsible for decoding each and every single language that we have in the universe. Okay? Well, when it comes to L1, development of L1, we don't have this microchip, not even in L2, okay? But what we do have is something similar because when we learn or when we use L1 in the process of learning a second language, we're going to create some sort of a template, or L1 or a native language is going to serve as a foundation, as a basis for this comparison. Remember, a couple of seconds ago, I just said that we use recognition to make comparisons between languages. And this comparison is actually what something very similar to the theory of universal grammar. We're going to make this comparison. This comparison is going to be very, very important because what are we doing as language, as second language teachers? We're just telling our students, you have the concept. You know the concept of boat. You know the concept of a mug. You know the concept of window. You know the concept of where is. You know the concept of uh, I am. What we're going to do, we're going to show you the correct combination of words that will have the same representation that you already possess. And that's what we're doing. They're going to say, oh, okay, so I already have this in my mind. I already have this template in my mind based on L1, based on my native language. So how do I do that with second language? Oh, I cannot use a determiner here. I have to use a determiner there, or an article. Or, oh, I have to invert because in my language, all I have to do is change the intonation if I want to ask a question. But in this language, I cannot just change the intonation. I also need an extra word to make a question. So, of course, it's not exactly like universal grammar, but we have some instances, we have some signals of universal grammar, we have some hints of universal grammar here. And again, that's why L1 is so important when we're teaching a second language. Is it a sin to use L1 in the classroom? Definitely not. Definitely not. But should we use it all the time? No, of course not. Because what is the target, the goal? To make our students produce in the target language, be able to listen to something in the target language, or to read something in the target language, and to be exposed to the target language the most they can. But if we're going to use L1 to transcend, to make our students understand something, then it's all right. And then what do? With drill, we go for performance phase, and that's all right. It's okay to use L1 in the classroom. Okay, guys? Thank you so much. This was the very first episode of Crossing the T's. We're going to have another one in a couple of weeks. Thank you so much for joining us. If you liked this premiere of Crossing the T's, don't forget to hit like at the end of it. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Machiello Consultoria. Mattiello Consultoria. All right? Thank you so much. See you guys around. Bye bye.